Welcome to No Room for Phonies.
Episode 112.
We're doing another book worth reading, and this is called Making Judgments Without Being Judgmental, Nurturing a Clear Mind and a Generous Heart by Terry D. Cooper. And this all started me looking for this book when we were having a conversation with my friends at breakfast about being judgmental and what that really meant. So I did a little research and found this book, and it's actually a really, really, really in-depth book about judging and being judgmental and all that sort of stuff. So it's very interesting. So
It was interesting the time it is written post-pandemic,
right,
and just that it came up in your Google search, or was it?
yeah.
Where did you search for it?
I just searched for it in a Google search,
Okay.
just
I
about
just
a
thought
book.
it was pretty interesting that that's the one that came up.
Yeah, because he talks a little bit about how people are so polarized now and there's so much judgmentalism. So he starts out by saying we dull our experiences and reduce our adventures in life by trying to fit everything into neat little categories. And we have our labels in our hand and our stereotypes with us when we approach new people or situation. And what he says is labeling reduces anxiety and intensity and helps us quickly know what to do with the differences between us, mostly because differences frighten us and we feel threatened. And that pushes us into like black and white, or what he calls dualistic thinking.
Yeah. And in other books that we've read about the human brain and organizational psychology, and just the fact that as humans have evolved, or society has bonded, we, of course, perceive threats that are dangerous to us and survival. So whatever is different is actually what our brain perceives as a threat.
Right.
So that's where this goes right to brain science.
And we develop defensive, self-protective mental habits, and self-doubt and self-judgment convince you that you have no right to kind of even a voice an opinion at all. So he says, like, do you question yourself? Do you doubt your opinion? Do you respect boundaries? Are you comprehensive when you consider perspectives? Are you judgmental and reactive to judgments by others? And I love this line because he says, don't become a narrow-minded defender of open-mindedness.
Because as soon as we think, oh, I'm so open-minded and you are so closed-minded,
Yes.
we've just started the dualistic judgment.
And then we get stuck in inflexible thought patterns, and we don't have a tolerance for ambiguity. So we are all judgmental. We all have this idea of moral superiority and intellectual superiority, but we often don't know or understand the whole story.
And judgmentalism alienates us from our own dark side.
And he talks about the ideas of grace and tender acceptance, and we need to see each other's humanity without fixating on a single act.
And self-righteousness is putting others down and feeling entitled to evaluate another human being. And you just fall in love with the job of measuring and ranking others.
And judgments we hold about specific issues need to come from a larger context of care and love. So he talks about the difference between making judgments and being judgmental. And basically what he says that it's appropriately to negatively evaluate actions and behavior that bring hurt or damage or pain to another person. We need to use our conscience, our convictions, our principles, and our ethical concerns, and we need to talk about what is detrimental and destructive. We can't live our lives value neutral, and all these things constantly guide our behavior then.
And in postmodern world where everything is relative and everything's okay, we tend to walk away from actually thinking of some of those hurtful, damaging, or painful things, and we just kind of make it all neutralized, which is not what he's saying.
No, he's saying not to embrace a judge nothing philosophy, which leads to all this neutrality and moral indifference, where one morality is as good as the next. And then the main thing he talks about over and over again is the idea of judging the behavior, not the person.
Which is very hard to do.
Yeah.
But
And then he has this whole healthy judgments versus judgmentalism. So when you have concern and you're holding up convictions with clarity and tolerance for others, caring if you hurt someone's feelings and not being concerned about winning, then that's healthy. And then the whole idea of refusing to distrust someone's motives unless you have clear evidence. So the idea that you give people the benefit of the doubt.
And then there's tolerance, where you're not holding to religious or moral concepts that disrespect each other. It's okay to hear another perspective, and you can respectfully listen without agreeing.
And then it's that idea again of behavior versus people. We can become very judgmental in our fight against judgmentalism. So we denounce harmful behavior or erroneous ideas without condemning the person who adheres to them. So you can do that. You can actually say, that person is still a human being, but their behavior is not appropriate.
Yeah, I think we all fall into this trap when we think, we're better than others and that we are less judgmental than others.
Yeah. No, it's true. And we have to be willing to make a journey into someone else's world, which means there's a possibility that we might actually be changed. So we need to let go of intellectual arrogance and ego and not be a conversation stopper and not relentlessly argue a point.
Right. Or just not walk away and say, I'm done.
Yeah. So we kind of need that calm, sober insistence on looking at all the evidence before we reach a conclusion. And so that takes time to reflect, which I don't think people do a lot of reflecting these days. That's my opinion, but that's my judgment. I think it's hard because it takes time.
Yep, it does.
And yeah.
And we need to be unafraid, not driven by fear, and respect complexity, which is also, it's so easy to slide into dualism.
Yeah. There's more than one way to look at it. So he does a lot of charts in it. And the first chart that he shows is the difference between critical thinking and thinking critically. One is critical thinking is careful, thinking critically is negative. So critical thinking is rational, thinking critically about things is an emotional reaction that condemns, it's hot-headed, it generalizes. So I would really encourage you to grab the book and look at some of these charts in there. They're really, really good at defining, like a critical thinker accepts reality and can critique themselves, but someone who is thinking critically denies, demolishes, and is themselves above criticism. So anyway, he does a lot of it in chart form, and then he goes into a lot of detail explaining the charts. So it's very good. And then he does, he talks about the idea of being reflective and open-minded versus like focusing on sound bites and cliches. So
which is dangerous in these days of Twitter and social media media memes, which are the sound bites and cliches.
And one of the things he says is that loud does not mean profound. So I always kind of think of the Donald Trump era where someone's shouting from a microphone all kinds of things that are irrational and hype, and being accurate is less important than being colorful. And you can easily make a whole bunch of pronouncements, but there's no comprehension or, kind of depth of understanding. And the
next section he goes into is about insecure arrogance versus confident humility.
The mystery of one man is too immense and too profound to be explained by another man. And that's a quote by Henry Nouwen. And arrogant thinking does not see the need for empathy. Empathy is the capacity to enter another person's viewpoint and understand life from that angle. And it's actually a cognitive exercise.
I really found that interesting, that it wasn't about feeling
No,
the same as
it's
somebody
cognitive.
else. It was
Yeah.
really to think through another person's viewpoint.
So you kind of have to listen with new ears and fewer preconceived ideas. And judgmental thinking is intoxicated with its own perspective, and it's kind of drunk on the wine of his own certainty, which I found that was an interesting
It's a good
quote.
metaphor. Perspective taking builds relationships, and we don't have a monopoly on reality. So what is the relationship between arrogance and insecurity? Well, he presents another chart about that.
Where he talks about arrogance is often a cover for deep insecurity. So he calls it confident humility and insecure arrogance. So goals, when you're confident, your goals are in harmony with your true self. And when you're insecure and arrogant, your false self relentlessly is searching for praise, and it's parading around the accomplishments, the relationships, for prestige. So it's kind of those status seekers, whereas that confident humility accepts moral responsibility and the need for forgiveness and acknowledges and appreciates the accomplishments of others.
Whereas the insecure, arrogant person minimizes and justifies moral flaws and feels enormous envy and disdain towards others' accomplishments.
Right. And your insecure, arrogant person also hates vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he gets into a whole discussion of grandiosity, shame, and narcissism. And he defines narcissism as the tendency to be self-absorbed, self-inflated, and in constant need of adoration and praise, incapable of caring for others, outraged when their needs are not met, no remorse, very little gratitude, entitled to what they want, no sincere thanks or genuine apologies, and vicious envy toward others who accomplish more than they do. They're self-righteous and condemning.
He also explored the aspect that we are too quick to call people narcissists.
Right.
And that actually approaching people with that opinion or judgment of them from like before you get to know them and before you listen to them could actually spiral out of control and create a narcissistic response.
Right. Just because of the way they're approached.
Yeah.
Right. Pride is closely connected with insecurity and anxiety, and grandiosity and shame usually travel together. The grandiose self is also the highly fragile self.
And humble self-confidence, the humility comes from a deep recognition of our limitations, our faults, and our internal struggle, but not at the expense of recognizing our gifts, abilities, and positive qualities. So it's not that fake humility.
No, it's a joyful embrace of my humanity. Humility makes us feel worthy. Faded humility makes us focus on performance. And self-confidence kind of emerges from that deep knowledge of our strengths and weaknesses. Confident humility appreciates and affirms the gifts and achievements of others, and we find confidence not by frantically searching for it, but instead by throwing ourselves into service, basically. And then he does another section. So it's called responding with judgments versus reacting with judgmentalism.
So in the chart, the two columns are responding and reacting.
Right. And he, kind of encourages us to learn to respond rather than react, and that you should respond from centeredness and grace. And distorted thoughts produce distorted feelings that push us to react. Do we engage in higher order thinking, consider options, and think creatively in the face of differences or conflicts with others, and try to avoid egocentric thinking? So then there's another big chart of, The reactive person is self-centered and thoughtless, motivation controlled by feelings, shaky and threatened beliefs, whereas a responding person has conviction in their beliefs and has an internal decision that they've made, recognizes alternate views. And the other one that I thought was interesting was this idea of seeing the context of anybody's behavior.
Right. So there's a whole context.
Yeah.
Whereas the reactive personality or reactive behavior is defining a person by one act.
Right. And then the next part that he does is responsible assertiveness versus reactionary aggression. And so kind of in order to avoid judgmentalism, we have to work on our levels of reactivity. So we have to improve our ability to recognize and express our anger. So the whole idea of, overreacting is part of this. And then he talks about guilty judgments versus shameful judgmentalism. So judgmentalism equals an unhealthy sense of shame and ridicule and condemnation. The condemned person feels shame. The condemner is trying to cover shame. Shame is transformed by grace. Guilt is the partner of judgment. Shame is the mate of judgmentalism. So that, and then there's a whole chart on guilt
versus
and shame.
Yeah.
Like guilt can help us sometimes, right? Because it focuses on specific things to change, whereas shame is just attacking. It's isolating. It immobilizes you. It's linked to some ideal standard, where guilt, promotes self-acceptance and making amends.
And
So
it looks for change without threatening one's own worth. And it lets go of unrealistic standards.
Right. So self-evaluation is often driven by a more basic sense of inadequacy, and self-judgmentalism turns us into our own worst enemy because we're condemning ourselves. And a self-judgmentalist mentality is grace-resistant, antagonistic, demeaning, and internally it's an enemy. So a negative message that we send to ourselves or others hound and heckle and distort our clear thinking. And when you're judgmental, you're hungry for an assault.
Yeah, it's all just about oversimplifying and insulting. Just that quick reaction.
Yeah. And then he talks about how we alleviate insecurity towards others, like the idea of accommodating, like if you are trying to alleviate insecurity toward others, you're accommodating and self-sacrificing and people-pleasing and conflict avoidant, and you agree with other. All change begins with awareness and assessment. Offer yourself a peaceful, private attention that encourages growth. If you're trying to alleviate insecurity against others, you dominate and control others, and you feel you're always right, and your blaming is a way of running away from yourself.
So we just need to ask ourselves, are we using our psychological energies to protect, defend, and stubbornly maintain our false self? Or do we use those energies, the same ones, psychological energies to protect, defend stubbornly, but to understand and improve ourselves?
And interesting, I just read another book by Richard Rohr where he talks about the false self as the ego. Mm-hmm. And the ideal self as the soul, or finding your inner balance or your inner whatever. And then if you're trying to alleviate insecurity away from others, then you are in a compulsive isolation and disengagement, like a lifestyle of non-involvement. And you prefer detachment. So the adventure of loving, caring, and throwing ourselves at the world is worth it. And then his next discussion is about authoritative judgments versus authoritarian judgmentalism.
So basically, authoritative judgments are judgments based on research and facts.
Yeah.
And authoritarian judgmentalism is all about that control and shaming.
Yeah. So authoritarian people, we should never be surprised at their rigidity and their all or nothing pronouncements. We need to encourage them to encounter different perspectives, to think of alternative perspectives and invite them to take on other people's perspectives. And also, on the same thing, you recognize their anxiety and insecurity beneath that swollen ego and what is basically the false self that we're projecting, right? They often become hostile when questioned. They don't like to rethink their world. They recognize they have doubt, and that is often why they attack. And they understand that they bring their life experiences to the table, and so that is often why they, that's kind of like looking at the context, because we interpret the world through our own mental filter. So I like this line too, no one has a complete lock on absolute truth all the time. So we have to be humbly open to listening to other people's perspectives and opinions.
Yeah, we need to remind ourselves that others have had experiences that we've never had. And we need to focus on the true goal of the conversation, which is a commitment to truth and mutual respect.
Like sometimes when you were listening to someone and you say, oh, I know how you feel, I went through this or whatever. Sometimes we don't listen to the whole story, and we need to invite greater humanness into our dialogue and more enveloped with care and affirm the person. Sometimes you affirm the person, but you disagree with what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to always put people down, and an uncaring argument never helps in the pursuit of truth. Like just getting into an argument with someone about something doesn't move anything forward.
No, because there's no caring in an argument if you just want to win.
So his ending part sort of says, acceptance is the birthplace of compassion and gratitude. Grace provides a desire to give back to life what we have been given.
Understand people before criticizing behavior.
And empathy pushes us to recognize our common humanity rather than our entitlement to judge.
Grace is both radically accepting and a motivator for change.
And conviction does not have to involve belligerence. And I think that's just a great line. And again, I mean, I'm being whatever, but I go back to, I just turned on YouTube today, and there was Trump was giving something, and he's just belligerent.
Mm-hmm.
And many of the people who are with him, and I mean, I'm not being judgmental. I've watched.
Just making an observation.
I'm making an observation of it, and that is perfect. That is perfectly legitimate, and to have a discussion. And I think one of the biggest challenges, like that I would have if I was in the States right now, or even here, and we've had that challenge with someone who actually believes, how do you move someone forward who is so like set that that person is okay, mm-hmm. and just can't see the forest for the trees, kind of a thing, when there isn't a belief and a conviction.
Well, in our experience, we've had conversations where we are open and we ask, would you be open to considering maybe one thing is off or wrong,
right.
And they're just not. And in the end, ultimately, it's those dualistic people that have walked away from the conversation rather than us saying
walking away.
We're done.
Yeah. And I mean,
in most cases.
Yeah. No, and I mean, then there's I agree to disagree.
Yes.
And
mm-hmm.
You're not going to like change my mind or convince me that you're right.
But we have enough relationship connections that we can continue the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, because if you do just become belligerent, it just stops all the conversation and nothing moves forward. Mm-hmm. So he has a lot of great perspectives, and there's tons of information in the book to explain really the difference between being judgmental and
but it is a quick read.
Making a judgment. It's a quick read.
Yeah, it is a quick read, and with the help of the charts and then quickly explaining the charts, it's really
Yeah.
Yeah, it was easy to
It,
grasp.
and it really brought home to me the importance of bringing bringing humanity, like even the worst person who is unbelievable is still a human being. And so that's how we have to move forward as people in this world, or we are in serious trouble.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a great book. And on May 30th, we're going to look at the book Permission to Feel.
I love that book.
I do too. So, we're going to have a look at it. I think we might have looked at it before, but we're going to take another closer look at it. And that's another book worth reading. So, thanks for joining us on No Room for Phonies, where we kind of give you the bird's eye view of some great books. And if you are struggling with, am I judgmental? You really do need to pick up this book and have a look.
We all are sometimes.
We all are, but I'm just saying, if the way I
Right.
operate generally a judgmental, or do I make good judgments based on
Right.
So, yes, we're all judgmental at times. So, thanks for joining us for our bird's eye view of books worth reading. This book worth reading, Making Judgments Without Being Judgmental, Nurturing a Clear Mind and a Generous Heart by Terry D. Cooper.
Thanks for joining us. Good night.